Don't buy board games you can't afford. It's a bit of an obnoxious title, really, and it is obnoxious, but it's also true. I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. If you're new here, well, subscribe, like, lurk in the shadows, comment, all those good things. But if you're not new here, well then, hi, thanks. Don't buy board games you can't afford. Now, this is a video that is sort of been in my backlog for a while, more specifically about the idea of generally making sound decisions in the hobby of buying what is within your bracket of affordability, luxury, whatever it is, and really never going into debt for board games. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of things in this video, timestamps down below to every little thing, or as many things as I can. But in particular, this spin on this video is inspired by, well, Descent primarily. The new Descent, $175 retail game from Fantasy Flight, Descent 3.0 or Legends, whatever they call it. I don't actually know the current title of the newest one. And then more importantly by a bunch of other content creators as well talking about this. There's been this subject, not just content creators, the subject has been coming up in various Facebook groups, in Board Game Geek threads, and content creation as well, from Tom Vassell talking about it to Jason Terprez from Shelf Stories had a whole video of board games being too expensive, a great video, I highly recommend, watch it, we'll talk about it more doing this video. Legion of Games talked about it. There are a bunch of people talking about the nature of expensive board games because board games are expensive. Now, this isn't really anything new, but there has been a slow increase on the cost of board games over time. I remember way back, going back to my first 2 years in the hobby, and Eclipse at like $65 from Cool Stuff Inc. That was, to me, the epitome of an expensive board game. I mean, $65, that's a lot of money. I can get 2 games for that price. That was a lot of money. Seems pretty cheap now, unfortunately. Eclipse at $65, the original Eclipse, not Second Dawn for the Galaxy. Depending on how old you are in this hobby, you might have understood what I meant there, but games have been getting more and more expensive. Now, this is a combination of a few different things. It's a combination of the fact that Kickstarter has really managed to sell us on board games as a hobby of luxury. A hobby of, here, look what you can actually get and afford to get or not. I mean, Chronicles of Drunagar has an all-in pledge of close to like $600, and it's not the only one. We have games like this Nemesis. We have games like Storm Thunder. There are so many different games coming out with the all-in. Madara, the all-in pledges are $500 plus to get those games. And that trend has been drifting over to retail with games like Gloomhaven, with games like Twilight Imperium 4, with games like the new Descent. Games are expensive, and they're getting more and more expensive. And it doesn't mean you can't find cheap games. You can still find cheap games. But along with that $25 copy of My City that you can buy from Miniature Market, which, I mean, by the way, when it's on sale, $25 for My City, 24 plays out of that with 4 people, that is a solid amount of game for your dollar. But right next to that, there's the $175 Descent. There are a lot of games out there. Something Jason Perez talks about in his video. He talks about board games being too expensive. And I think the video is worth watching. I agree with most of his points, but he talks about the nature of temptation. He talks about the nature of, we all sit there and we buy things based on what we see. It's easy for me to have a title like this, Don't Buy Board Games You Can't Afford. It's an obnoxious title and it's easy for me to have it, but it's not necessarily easy for the person who's tempted by that thing. When you see showing up in your Facebook groups 14 people talking about how they just bought the newest copy of Descent, and you were previously thinking that nobody's going to buy that. Fantasy Flight was going to fail. How dare they think that they can sell a $175 version of the newest Descent? It is expensive. It is overpriced. It's the 3rd iteration that's not going to work. And then you see everyone around you buying it. There's a degree of FOMO, fear of missing out, of seeing that game and wanting to add it to your collection, a game you weren't previously considering. I say this as someone who was not previously considering getting Descent. I'm still not. But I did consider it once I saw others actually buying that game. A lot of others buying that game. And there's Flamecraft. It's another great example that Jason brought up in his video. Flamecraft is going to be a game that if you look on Kickstarter, 10,000 backers, about to cross $1 million. Very excited for Carpet Alchemy. Very happy for them. But the reverse side of being happy for Carpet Alchemy, of being happy for the company that has a hit on their hands, the reverse side is if you look at the pledge levels, there's 2 basic pledge levels. There's I don't remember the exact prices, but there's a roughly $40 pledge level for the retail edition of the game. And then there's like an $80 pledge level for the deluxeified version of the game, which deluxeifies some components and adds more things. It doesn't add a ton of gameplay. It adds a few extra stuff, and more primarily deluxe fight components and game trees and upgraded resources. And that $40 game, which so many people would have been perfectly fine with, they would have been perfectly content to own. How many people do you think are backing that pledge level versus the other? There's like 500 people backing the cheaper pledge level, and like 8,500 or 9,000 people backing the more expensive deluxe fight pledge level. And as Jason points out, as Shelf Stories points out, do you think that those people really think it's worth twice the price? Or there's a degree of FOMO involved. There's a degree of, I don't want to get the thing that's lesser. I would have been happy with the $40 retail version if it's all that existed. My City at $25 is excellent. It's an excellent value on your dollar. But if there was a better version right next to it, maybe I'd want that version, even if it isn't offering me twice the value, twice the gameplay, twice the whatever. We are tempted by what we see, and marketing appeals to that temptation, and marketing pushes us towards that temptation. On all those points, I completely agree with Jason. Where I disagree is I think making companies aware of it is good. I think trying to rely on companies in any way to solve our problems is not good. Hence the title is not good. It won't work. I don't think we can rely on the companies around us to stop selling us stuff to solve our problems. Hence, again, the obnoxious title of this video, Don't Buy Board Games You Can't Afford. It's not up to them. It's up to you. 78% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. It's a number I've seen anywhere from 60 to like 84, but the most recent Google I did has a Forbes article. I'll link to it down below. 78% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. Now that means one of two things. It either means that 78% of people are fortunate enough, are lucky enough to get exactly what they need to survive. Month to month, year to year, they are living paycheck to paycheck. They are getting the exact amount of money they need to pay their bills. They are fortunate and lucky. Well, not fortunate and lucky, but they're coincidentally, let's put it coincidentally. Coincidentally, they make exactly what they need to survive. Or more realistically, it means we spend what we have. As a culture, as people, and I think this is going to be an American problem to a degree, but probably worldwide to an extent as well, where we spend what we have. We manage to constantly increase the amount of money that is flooding into the world. I mean, way back in the Industrial Revolution, they had these talks of how we're going to have 20-hour work weeks or whatever it was. Those things didn't happen because along with the increase in the efficiencies we have and the increase in the money and the production we have comes increase in consumerism. An increase in buying everything available to us. 78% of Americans spend what they have is what they mean when they say live paycheck to paycheck. And again, this is just a numbers game. Think about it practically speaking. Think about yourself, for instance. And if you're not relevant to this, then great. But think about yourself. Over the past 5 years, how much money have you saved? How much money have you lost? Meaning, as an aggregate, are you $50,000 in debt now that you weren't 5 years ago? Or do you have $50,000 extra in savings that you didn't 5 years ago? Most people go year after year, day after day, decade after decade, not saving money. That means we're either coincidentally making exactly what we need, or we manage to spend what we have. Think about the last time you got a tax refund, or the last time you got a raise. Did you suddenly start putting extra money equitable to that tax refund or raise into your savings account? Did you suddenly start saving extra, or did you manage to spend more? Which of those things happened? This isn't meant as an attack. It's human nature. It's human nature to do this. This goes back to what Jason's saying. There's human nature involved in seeing the pretty thing, and we often only don't buy it when we can't afford to not buy it. Not as an individual item. Any individual game on its own might be one thing or the other, but as we're trying to mentally balance what we spend every single month, we allow ourselves the expenditures that will not hurt us. And savings is very helpful, but it's not helpful today. It's helpful tomorrow. The amount of times I've seen, one of the things that prompted this video idea when I first had it, a long time ago, again, it's being done now because of the increased price in games and all that, but is I've constantly seen on forums, on threads, on groups, the idea that people will say, car broke down, have $2,000 in car repairs, selling a bunch of board games to pay for that. And you shouldn't have to do that. You should sell board games you're not playing, to be very clear. I'm a huge fan of that on my channel. Sell the board games you're not playing, but don't be selling them when you absolutely need the money. You should ideally have something in savings, and it's not necessarily easy. And I recognize that I'm saying this from a place of having a decent job, of having the money to pay my bills, but understand that I'm also saying this as somebody who took these stances, who did this when I couldn't. I remember back when I first got married, when I first moved to the US from Canada, and I got my first job, I was making $11 an hour packing boxes in a warehouse. I barely could afford a rent or let alone food or anything else. And we made decisions around that. We still managed to save because we made decisions around how little we had. I didn't have board games as a hobby at the time, to be fair, so I don't know what would have happened there. But I sat there and we had conversations, my wife and I had conversations about the difference between contacts and glasses because one would potentially save us money. We had conversations, we used our sister-in-law's Netflix account. I used one of her profiles because why spend $10 a month if we didn't have to? We sat there and we took a stance and an approach of trying to spend as little as we possibly could because at $11 an hour, with my wife being in school, it's not a lot of money to survive on for two people. It's really not. And as my income grew, I did try to save as much as I possibly could. Now, I spend more than I should. Absolutely, I do. For one thing, board games. But in general, there is a degree of purchases. It's so easy to spend money nowadays. You go on Amazon, you pop on, you buy that $20 to $5 thing, no problem. And then you keep doing that, and suddenly it's, 2.5 months later, and you realize you spent $600 on Amazon. These things add up, and it's so easy to do it when we don't see them. But there's a reason why every single book on the planet that talks about savings talks about how you should be saving first. Take the money away from yourself before you ever see it. If you wait till the end of the month, there is nothing left to save. If you have 5, 10, 15, 20% of your paycheck taken out and put into savings before you can ever touch that money, you will learn to adjust around what you have. And those numbers might seem intimidating to you. And depending on who you are, you might actually be one of the small percentage of people who genuinely cannot save a thing. Most people don't fall into that category. Most people fall into the category of being able to spend, but being able to save, but they spend what they have. Again, it's not a judgment thing. We all do it. I definitely spend more than I should as well. But most people, you ideally want to be doing is you want to be taking some degree. If you can't start with 10, 15, 20%, start with $50 a month. For 2 months, for the next 3 months, set aside $50 a month in savings. And when you don't see the pain, when you don't feel the pain, and you likely won't, the next 3 months after that, do $100 a month. And keep bumping it up. Keep bumping up the amount you take out of your paycheck and put into savings that you don't spend on board games, that you don't spend on whatever luxury purchases are in your life. And do that again and again and again, and you will find yourself that 2-3 years from now, you'll be able to put aside hundreds of dollars a month and you won't necessarily notice. We learn to spend what we have. 78% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. It is not because we happen to make what we exactly need to survive. Another frightening stat, a little tangential but relevant, is credit card debt. Definitely never ever buy games on credit card debt. It is absolutely, it's horrifying. The average American spends $855 a year on credit card interest, on rollover interest. In other words, the average American is giving $855 of their money away every single year by carrying a balance on their credit cards. And if you're thinking, hey, I'm not that person, well, that's great. But that also means that someone else is spending $1,700 a year in order to average it out. That's money that people are putting onto credit cards because they can't afford to do so. Now, granted, some of them are doing so because they have a car expense and they can't afford not to. But many of us put ourselves in these positions. Many of us spend what we have and then wind up with that car expense. And suddenly now we have a hard decision in our hands. And then we wind up paying $855 a year on average in rollover credit card interest. That's money that every year could have been a Chronicles of Jonagar full all-in pledge and then some. Not to say that's what you should be doing with money, but the point is, when you make these decisions, when you put yourself in a place where you don't have savings, where you can't afford the next thing, and you have to start carrying credit card debt, it does mean you're basically depriving yourself. You're not punishing anyone else but yourself when you're in that position. Again, sometimes you absolutely have to, something you can do. I'm talking about the times we put ourselves in those positions. There's a reason credit card companies are happy to offer us those $100 rewards for signing bonuses here and there because, congratulations, they gave 4 people a $100 reward for signing bonus and they got 3 people who are paying $855 a year in credit card interest. It's in their best interest to do this. Now, this video isn't all doom and gloom. One of the things I saw in Jason, it is all doom and gloom, I shouldn't say that. It's basically all doom and gloom. The title of the video and the topic of the video is don't buy board games you can't afford, and I mean it. Now, it's not meant to take away from your hobby. A big thing that is relevant, and going back to where I would disagree with Jason and Shelf Stories in his video, is there is a degree of incentivizing companies to be aware of what they're doing. But there are also people who can afford a certain degree of luxury in their hobby. For many people, myself included, this hobby is a luxury. It's a hobby of luxury. Yes, I want to play board games, but if that were my only point, then I could survive on significantly fewer games than I have. I could survive on significantly less expensive games than I have. Black Rose Wars is an excellent game. You can go all in on this and the original and spend $800, whatever it is. Or you could buy Wiz War for $40 and basically have 90% of the same experience. There are many, many ways to save money or spend less money in this hobby, but I do consider it a hobby of luxury. And if you tell companies they can't sell luxury products, again, ignoring the fact for a second that the companies will never actually listen to you, but there are people who can afford to spend money on board games who want those board games. We don't go to every single possible industry and say, well, you can't have expensive watches, you can't have expensive cars, you can't have expensive furniture, you can't have expensive anything. Clothing should always be, well, $7 a shirt. You can't have $70 shirts. There's no reason for those to exist. There are reasons for them to exist. There are people who have the leeway to spend on those things, and it might be a luxury to those people. But going to Jason's video, and this topic of where you can spend money, is I saw comments on it, which I thought were on point, talking about Descent. There were two ends of the spectrum. One end of the spectrum I saw was, it's 15 hours of minimum wage to be able to buy Descent. That's absolutely insane. That's 15 hours of your life to get this copy of the game, and that's true. And then there were copies on the other end of the spectrum of, well, basically, if me and my 3 friends go see a movie and we do that 3 times, that's 3 movies, that's the same price as Descent. I might as well get Descent, we can all split the cost, and we'll have far more than 3 movies worth of entertainment from it. Again, also true. I thought both those statements were on point. They just represent opposite ends of the spectrum. Because the person who's getting the person who's spending 15 hours of minimum wage to buy Descent is not the same person, hopefully, who's going to see 3 movies in the next 2 months. Hopefully they're seeing 1 movie a year. Or better yet, they're just seeing movies at home. You don't need to see a movie in theater. Everything's relative to the amount of spending you have, which brings us to various things you can do to help with this temptation, or to manage your hobby, manage this luxury. And some of these I do myself, some of these are less relevant to myself, but there are 5, to close off this video, there's 5 things, 5 aspects of how you can potentially make this process a little easier for yourself. Number 1 is going to be simple. Not simple, but simple to understand, not necessarily simple to do, which is removing temptation. If you're finding yourself spending money that you can't afford, if you're buying board games you can't afford to buy, remove temptation. Stay off Kickstarter, or at the very least, don't go on Kickstarter unless you're going for a specific purpose. Never window shop on Kickstarter. Stay off YouTube. Unsubscribe from my channel, from any other content creators you're following, or just don't go on YouTube in the first place, because we're going to show you things you want to buy. I'm part of the problem. I'm showing you the pretty things because I like this hobby. I love this hobby. I love the games in it, and I'm excited about these things. And for those that are making the right decisions around what they can afford and not afford, I'm going to continue to do so. But absolutely, I'm part of the temptation problem. Myself and any other content creator. And then Facebook groups. Any group you're in, Reddit, Facebook, Board Game Geek, if you're in groups where people are showing you all the things they're buying, consider staying off those too. You know those 17 people you saw buying Descent and super excited about it? You know what you didn't see pictures of? The 724 people who didn't buy Descent. For every person buying a copy and tempting you, there are so many more who didn't. They may have wanted to, they may have chosen not to, but you don't get to see pictures of, look, here's what I didn't buy. So staying away from temptation is definitely going to, that's all, by the way, under one thing. That's number 1. Remove temptation, wherever it's coming from. Number 2, and this is very much the way I approach this channel and myself, my own collection, take a cycling approach to your collection. Sure, buy what you want, but cycle them out. Turn around, sell them, turn around and trade them. Cycle the board games you get. Get them in, but then turn around and remove them. Every month when I do my board games leaving the collection video, I'll always get a comment like, hey, what do you do? Do you donate them? Speaking frankly, no. I believe in charity. I give charity, but for my board games, for my collection, I use those board games to cycle what I'm doing. I love this hobby, and a lot of it is about playing games, but a lot of it is about the exploration of the new, and so I use my own hobby to fund itself. That $600 board game, this Chronicles of Runeterra that I buy or whatever, when I'm done with it, I'll turn around and sell it for most of what I got, if not more. And that allows me to buy the next one. It allows me to enjoy the hobby in a cyclical approach and to experience the fun, the temptation of it all without being damaging to my finances, or at least minimally. It's more like I'm renting these games long term as opposed to actually buying anything. My $40 game that I try costs me $32. The other $8 is lost between shipping, handling, between whatever time, all those things. but it costs me far less to engage and enjoy many aspects of this hobby if you take a cycling approach. Now, before you choose option 2, actually do it. It's very easy to say that you will. It's very easy to buy a game saying, hey, I can sell it, no problem. But if you don't, if you aren't actually selling them and you're just buying them telling yourself you can sell them, then holding its value is a meaningless concept. It's only if you actually are willing to take the legwork to sell it, to list it, to go ahead and pack it and ship it and all of that. Number 3, and this is relevant to the whole who you are, what your entertainment budget is, those movies, conversations, the minimum wage. Figure out what your entertainment budget is. We all have a degree of income. Hopefully we all have a degree of income. And then where that income goes is a different conversation. How much of your revenue, how much of your income goes towards your entertainment budget? Whether it's movies, books, Netflix, TV shows, whatever it is you're doing, Amazon Music, whatever it is you're personally buying, figure out what percentage of your income you can afford to devote to entertainment, and then what percentage of that goes towards board games within entertainment. This might be your own decision, it might be a decision with your significant other or whoever or whatever, but figure out what that budget is and then spend around that budget. It is very, very, very easy to buy every single game that shows up on Kickstarter when it shows up. Mythic Mischief, an abstract game that's going to run you, I don't actually know the price tag of it, but I mean, these are so many good games on Kickstarter. But it's very easy to spend the money on them all if you don't have some sort of limitation in place, whatever that limitation might be. But figure out some sort of limitation and then buy those games. I myself would buy fewer games if I allowed myself fewer purchases. If I sat there and said, hey, I can only get 10 games this month, which is a lot, by the way. But if I said I only get 5 games this month, I would pick different games. Which brings us to 4. Before you buy any single game, ask yourself why you're getting that game. What spot in your collection is it filling? Do you need that game? And it could be, anyone might have different answers to this, but when you go ahead and get a game, what player count is it best with? What mechanics does it have? What is the gameplay adding or giving that has a good spot in your collection? It is so easy to be tempted by so many different games on Kickstarter. But many of them are just iterations of other games. Nothing wrong with iterations. Sometimes we iterate towards amazing games, amazing experiences. But figure out what spot a game has in your collection. Figure out if you're even going to play it. That amazing game, Twilight Imperium 4, which I recently got rid of. I got it thinking that I would play it. But not once in the 3 years that I had it did I consider whether it would actually hit the table. An 8-hour-long experience is just not something that fits into my life at the moment. That was a mistake to get. There are other games that have been mistakes to get. Other games that I've looked at and said, hey, that looks cool, and then didn't look into it further. I didn't look into what ideal player count, what mechanics. It just looked good. There are mistakes we make in what we purchase because we're pulled in by the fact that it looks new, pretty, and shiny, but it may not be a good fit for our collection. So really question the games you're buying and what problem they are solving in your collection. And then 5, and this one you should be doing regardless, in my opinion, regardless of anything to do with this list, is save first and spend second. It's such a big deal. I'm telling you, you will, it feels, I know it's not, for those who aren't doing it, for those who are doing it, good on you. For those who aren't doing it, I know it's not something that's easy to hear or do or engage with. When you're looking at your money every single month and you're saying, well, I can barely pay my bills. But if you've been barely able to pay your bills for the past 5 years, it doesn't mean you're making exactly what you need to survive. It means you're adjusting your expenses to match your income. And so if you lower your income just a notch, just fictionally, you put it in savings, you will still adjust your expenses around your income. 78% of Americans do not live paycheck to paycheck. 78% of Americans spend what they have. And again, for those who find this video obnoxious, the topic, the title, the certain amount of preachiness involved in it, I get it. And I'm sympathetic too. I'm in a position where some of the things I'm saying no longer apply to me. I'll get free games from publishers. I back games that I have the income to back games that I want without having to overly consider things. Now, those are all side points because I do cycle my collection and I did save and I have been in positions. Again, I had conversations with my wife about contacts versus glasses so we can save $100 a year. That's not, I've been there. Even if I'm not there now, I have absolutely been there. I've been in a place where I just can't spend any degree of excess money. I remember the first time we found that we were expecting, I literally didn't know what we were going to do as far as the first time, like we have 4 kids now, but the first time I found that we were expecting, I was worried about the increased cost baby food would have. Actually, I think it was the other way around. We were expecting, we had the baby. Fortunately, Medicare covered the baby. Medicare, Medicaid, whatever it is, cover the baby. But then when my wife switched from breastfeeding to, sorry for the topic of the video, from breastfeeding to baby food, I was literally worried about the increased costs that would have on our budget. Like, oh no, we don't have that bandwidth. So yeah, I'm not unaware of what it's like to be trying to balance the things you want with not having a lot of money to pay for it. In any case, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video. I was going to think about ending it. And I hope you enjoyed this video and don't buy board games you can't afford, but that's still obnoxious. It's an obnoxious title. I'm sorry for it, but really genuinely try to balance what you actually can spend money on. Ignore my channel if you need to. Ignore it, seriously. Do what's best for yourself. Genuinely. Have a good one.